filtration too. I would like to get through tube filtration on Monday as well. Okay, so the binding energy is measured in what? Jonan, binding energy is measured in what?
KeV.
Perfect. Good. What is binding energy, Aurora?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Just one of those days for me as well.
Binding energy is the electrons bound to the shell.
It's basically in the name, right? It's binding the electrons in the orbital shell. So don't make it more complicated than what it is. Look for the names, okay? Potential difference is basically what is attracted. Is the electron attracted more, or is the electron attracted less? And we have the ability to regulate that, okay? We have the ability to regulate the electron's attractiveness. We have the ability to regulate, eventually, tube current. Because the faster the electrons flow, all of that, electrons flowing inside of the X-ray tube, is called tube current in the name. Current is basically electrons flowing. Perfect. Now, in characteristic interactions, we have tungsten atoms. We have 6 shells, right? 6 shells, LMNOP. We have how many electrons? How many electrons to choose from in the tungsten atom?
74?
74. Beautiful. So there are 74 potential interactions in one tungsten atom. So you can think about in the X-ray tube when we said there are thousands of interactions happening with every exposure. That is absolutely true, because in the tungsten atom we have 74 opportunities for our filament electrons to come in and collide with them. Make sense? Good. Now, if the incoming filament possesses enough kinetic energy, meaning it is flowing super, super, super fast at a higher than 69 keV, and it collides with an inner shell electron. John, does it have the ability to ionize that? If the filament electron has a kinetic energy possession of higher than 69 keV, does it have the ability to ionize an inner shell electron?
Yes.
The answer is yes. So what happens after that? So an inner shell electron, let's just call it a K shell electron, is removed. What happens?
The K shell electron is removed, and there's a cascade effect, and X-rays are produced where the outer shell electrons are all moving in to fill the voids that have been left.
So how is the X-ray being produced? In what way, thank you, John, in what way is the X-ray being produced? Just because we've ripped a K-shell electron out of its orbit, we've released it from its binding energy. We've now liberated the binding energy. What is producing the X-ray? The binding energy. Remember, when you push something that has been stable, that is stationary, right? If you take one marble and the marble is sitting there by itself, not doing anything, but you flick another marble towards it, both marbles are going to move, right? With that impact, with that collision, what was holding that one marble in place is no longer there. It is floating away in the form of energy. This energy, this bundle of energy, which was once binding, is now X-ray. It is flowing away in the form of a photon, aka X-ray. Make sense? But not only once. Because if the K shell was removed, that photon, that's a bundle of energy that's liberated, but we are having a cascading effect. The L has to move to the K. So another bundle of energy is being released as that binding energy from L to K is being broken or liberated. And then the process continues to happen. M to L, N to M, O to N, and P to O. Does that make sense? Anybody not understand what I just said? Everybody understands me perfect and clearly, and it's wonderful. And I'm like, Mom, Miss Laura, I'm learning physics.
Hey, Miss Laura, I just want to make sure I get it. So basically, that it's filling the vacancy. So like L is going to K, and then so forth, so forth.
Correct. So if you have it, let's just say you're famous and you have 74 bodyguards, and they all have to be positioned around you to secure you in rings. Wouldn't it make sense that if your K, your inner ring bodyguard, got removed somehow, that the ones that next to it would take a step forward and fall down? Well, in order to remove them from their post, they have to be liberated, don't they? So how are they liberated? How do they get out of that binding energy position? They have to release it. And that release of energy is called the photon. Make sense? And it happens until whatever, all of the rings from inner to outer are filled accordingly. Make sense? Everybody understand characteristic interactions? Now, from this, there are some math problems. I need you to go back and look at those math problems. They're pretty simple. They're basically saying, if the K shell electron was removed, we know that the binding energy of the K shell electron is 69 keV, right? Yes? So the incoming filament electron removed the K shell electron. L electron is going to drop down. And what is the L's binding energy?
12.1 keV.
12.1 keV, correct? Is that what you said? I don't have my book in front of me.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so now we're going to take the 69 keV, which was originally the K shell, but it has been ripped, right? It has been sent moving. That bundle of energy is releasing. So how do we measure that photon? We're going to take the K shell electron binding energy, subtract the L binding energy, and that will be the equivalent of the K photon energy. So 69 minus 12 point, what was it?
12.1.
12.1 will give you a result of
37.4 keV.
that is what is released in that photon. Now remember, everywhere the photon originates from is going to take the name of that shell. So the original electron that was collided, ionized, removed, is going to be, that is the K orbit. That is the K orbit. So the emerging photon is going to be a K characteristic photon. That is the name. It takes on the name of the shell. Meaning, if we had an M shell removed, then we would take the binding energy of the M shell. The N is going to drop down, right? You subtract those two energies, and then the M photon will emerge. So this is where we start to determine the energies of our photons. Got it? Which one, if I had an M photon and I have a K photon, which one will have the higher energy?
The K photon?
Absolutely. So the K is where we really like to get our photons. The K is really where we like to get our photons. Okay? So when we're wanting a higher surplus of photons, what do you think we're going to do to the potential difference? If we want a higher surplus of K photons, what did you say? Are we going to increase our potential difference or decrease our potential difference?
Increase.
Absolutely increase. absolutely increase, because we know that faster flowing filament electrons have a better opportunity to remove a K shell electron. Is that a yes? Is that an amen? Do we all understand that? No? Nobody's justly smiling. The only one. Anybody? Yes, Daniel, we're smiling. I like it. Tell me.
Hallelujah.
Ask your. Oh, woo-hoo! Okay. So with that being said, what's the next question? What is the next question? What do we have before we move on to Brim? Because we're done with characteristic. We're done. We understand characteristic. I want to move over to Brim. Go ahead. Time to ask. Amy, I see your question. I know you got one. Let's make it happen.
Okay, so I got lost in the where you said the M shell binding energy.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, so I get that we have to subtract the K shell binding energy from the L binding energy to get the K characteristic.
Right. Photon energy.
Yes.
It's not K characteristic by itself. It's the character, because the process was through characteristic. What does characteristic mean? Cascading.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot have a characteristic photon until another electron drops down from its orbit. So unless you have a cascading effect, that is where your characteristic photons emerge, because they're being released from their binding energy. They're releasing their binding energy to move to the next orbit. Make sense? No? No, you're not convincing me. But we can definitely talk offline. And I don't mind. I had slides, but I'll send you what I have, and then just go from there, I guess. And that's the best I can do right now. So sorry. I won't be doing this anymore. I'll be sticking myself in that office. All right. Did I answer your question? And you look at that binding energy chart. We know that the K possesses the highest binding energy. We just know it. So if we remove a K shell electron, we know that we're going to have a higher energy photon. Period. But we're also going to have 5 more photons emerge. How does 5 more photons emerge? Because of the cascading effect. Right? Now, remember what I talked about last chapter, leakage radiation? Leakage radiation. If a P shell electron drops into the O shell electron, how low is that energy? Pretty low. Guess what? Our protective housing is not going to allow it to go outside. Make sense? And this is what's also contributing to leakage radiation. Yes? Y'all are just ready to start your Friday, but I got one more class after me, so we're going to have to wait just a little bit longer, right? Yeah. What's going on? Am I missing something? What's the long faces? Like the weather outside, or what's going on? Like tough crowds, like mic check, 1, 2, mic check. Luke, talk to me.
Was there a question or?
I don't know. I'm just looking at the long faces and wondering if something happens. If something happened, something transpired, do I need to fix it? I'm here to fix it. Okay, so this is what we'll do. Brimster Long, and anything I'm going to tell you about Brimster Long. Brimster Long is a German word. Brimster Long is a German word. It's a German word. Okay? It means breaking. It means slowing down. It's basically taking the energy. I know you need my slides. I've already given you the book slides. I'm just kind of making a couple of adjustments with pictures, okay? But it's kind of like, let me talk to Pamela. You're driving down the highway. You with me, Pamela? Can you hear me okay? You're driving down the highway. You're about a speed about 70 miles an hour. You notice in front of you somebody put their brakes on. What's your initial step to do? What are you going to do next when you see those lights flash in front of you from the car that is in front of you? What are you going to do? I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
I will slow down and brake.
You will slam those brakes, right? Depending on the distance between you and the car in front of you, right? You're going to slam on the brakes. But when you slam on those brakes, are you going to stop right away? Thank you, Pamela. You're not going to stop right away. When you slam on those brakes, when you hit that brake pedal, it's going to be a distance, right? Right? So in that effort to slow down, all of that motion energy that you had at 70 miles an hour has been dramatically reduced. And all that energy is going to go where? What happens in your car if you have things in the front seat that are not secured when you slam on your brake? It gets thrown onto the floor, doesn't it? Right? Why did it get thrown onto the floor? That's that energy. Right? Because that abrupt stop. So, Brimster Long is kind of like that example. You're coming in, a filament is coming in, a filament electron is coming in. It's going so fast, it has not collided. It has not collided with any electrons at all. No collision of electrons. But it gets super, 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 duper, duper close to the nucleus. It gets past, this filament electron gets past the K-shell orbit. Now remember, the K-shell orbit is the closest electron to the nucleus, right? So this filament electron comes in, it gets super close to the nucleus, and there is a force from the nucleus that repels that electron and it makes it slow down. It's like putting on the brakes. When that electron is slowed down by the nucleic force, a bundle of energy emerges. A bundle of energy emerges. A bundle of energy emerges from that slowing or breaking down, slowing down of that filament electron. And not only is that filament electron slowed down, but it also changes direction. So look in your book and you're going to see examples of Brimster Long. Brimster Long is when a filament electron comes in, gets super close to the nucleus, doesn't collide with the nucleus, but the nucleus repels it, causes it to slow down, turn directions, turn an angle. And that energy that is released at that angle is a Brim photon. Is a Brim photon. So now we have two types of X-rays that are formed with filament electron interactions with the tungsten atoms at the anode. You have the characteristic, which is ionization, and then you have the Brimster Long, which is a slowing down or breaking of the filament electron, the incoming filament electron that gets so close to the nucleus that it goes and curves around the nucleus, changes direction of what was its original path, and that once they get into that quick turn, that energy is released in the form of a Brim photon. Yes, Miss Amy.
So whenever the Brimster interaction happens, it doesn't hit none of the orbital electrons, right?
Nope. So this is no ionizing. The Brimster Long photon did not ionize anything. Characteristic did. Brimster Long didn't. And when the slides that I'll say, when we have a filament electron that collides with another electron, that's only in characteristic. A Brimster Long photon is when the electron, the filament electron, bypasses all of the other electrons along its path. It gets super close to the nucleus. The nucleus says back off. And when it backs off, that filament electron breaks and turns its direction. In that angle of direction, turn and breaking, a photon emerges, or a bundle of energy. Kinetic energy is released, and that is your Brim photon. So there are two types of interactions, right? Two types of two types of X-rays. There's the Brim X-ray, and then there's the characteristic X-ray. They were generated two different ways. One ionized, one didn't. So, recap. Two types of X-ray interactions inside of the tube to make X-rays. We already talked about heat, right? Excitation, heat, no ionization. Ionization goes with characteristic, and then you start to have multiple photons emerge, right, from that interaction. And Brimster Long is basically an incoming filament electrons move so fast, close to the nucleus says back off, it makes it turn, break and turn, and that photon is released in the form of a Brim interaction. Got it? I will say this. Most of our X-rays are converted through Brim. Most of our X-rays are converted through the Brim interaction. Most of the X-rays we produce are through the Brim interaction. In our diagnostic level of imaging, the energy that we use in imaging, Brimster Long is the primary source, primary interaction for our source of X-rays. Questions? See, you guys don't need my slides. You just need my explanations. That's all. We did it. No, I'm joking. I'll send you guys my slides when my computer comes back up. But they're not complete. So if you see my slides looking a little different from yours on Monday, I still build and I go because I get creative every day with my information. Okay? Questions?
Can I ask a question about the characteristic interaction?
Sure.
Okay, so when the filament electron is going towards anode, and it has a chance to interact with all the outer shell electrons, right?
Correct.
And I know that the K shell electron is really the one that's doing most of the business. Like,
correct,
all the other ones don't have enough energy to really do anything.
Correct.
And it's, how do I say this? Is it just by chance that it makes it to the K? Does it get past all of them? Because I know all the other ones are spinning around.
Right.
Or does it hit them and continue on? Or if it hits them, does it get stopped?
You're talking about the filament electron?
Yeah.
It could probably collide with an outer shell electron, still have the potential to keep another collision going, depending on how much of energy or kinetic energy that oncoming filament electron had. So it has the ability to ionize an outer one and still have the potential to keep moving forward and collide with another one. Either way.
It's just kind of like by chance that it gets all the way in there. Okay.
Correct.
And the second question on that is, it collides with the K shell electron, the inner one, right?
Correct.
That moment before the cascade happens, I know this all happens instantaneously pretty much, but at that moment, the K shell electron is liberated. It flies off somewhere.
Correct.
The proton, an X-ray produced at that point before the cascade happens?
Correct.
And when the cascade happens, then we're getting multiple interactions, and they're all pretty low energy except for the K one.
Correct. The
Okay.
only other one that would be basically a bit, besides being substantial as like the K, is going to be the L. You're talking about the K and the L are the ones that are often sought just because of the higher energy. But obviously the K shell electron is going to have a higher energy. So yes, you hit it on the nose. You said it just exactly right.
So when the filament electron hits the K shell electron, and there's the math that we have to do to figure out the energy of that K shell electron.
Cascading. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the energy is just for the cascading. Is that energy is the difference between the filament electron energy and the binding energy?
Yes, and that's where it got a little because this is my first time using this source, and this is where it kind of contradicted itself with another source that I've been using for the last 4 or 5 years. When you have the initial impact of the filament electron with the K shell electron, that photon emerges. It always talked about the difference between the impact and so it was basically determined that the photon that emerged would possess about 69.5 keV as a photon is released, or the electron is as the K electron moves another direction and the filament electron moves another direction. The resulting energy would be that 69.5. This particular resource is saying if you're going to say the K characteristic photon, you have to utilize or subtract the K electron binding energy with the L shell binding energy to create the difference, and saying that is the photon that's emerging. My confusion, or not confusion, but I probably need a little bit more clarity, is to say, wouldn't that be the M shell photon that's emerging? Does that make sense? The one or the L that's moving into the K, wouldn't that one be? So let me relook at it and look at the resources that they give for the instructors, just to make sure that I'm telling you the exact same thing. But previous resource, even the same author said once the K shell is liberated, that photon would possess 69.5 keV energy. But I'll double check on it.
This book is saying it's like the difference between Correct. And the other shell. Okay.
I think because what's confusing is because they're still calling it K characteristic, and that's what's confusing to me. Because the K characteristic photon should have been when the filament electron removed the K shell electron. Does that make sense? Then the next one, the L, the M, the N, and the O would be the resulting of it. But let me go back through it and make sure that I'm reading it correctly, okay?
Can I ask one question about the Brim interaction too?
Sure, absolutely.
Let's see. So I'm looking at the PowerPoints, and it says, for example, a filament electron enters an atom with 100 keV of energy, passes very close to the nucleus, and leaves with 30 keV of energy. Brim's photon produced is 70 keV. That's the difference between. It's always going to be that 70, and that 70 number is actually the 69 from the K shell. And does Brim interactions, does it have anything to do with the other shells?
None at all. None.
So the 70 kV is from the K shell. It doesn't really say that.
Correct.
It says 70 kV. Okay.
Correct.
No questions.
And that's basically, it's just rounding up, because in the other source that I'm talked about is 69.5. And here it'll just say 69. So it's a rough. And then at 70 is the safe amount of kinetic energy that the filament electron can possess in order to create that. But I'll look at it again, and I'll have a little bit more of a clarity, because I have another resource book that I use, and I'll see if they've updated it, but I didn't quite understand, because same author, and I have the resource there if y'all want to see it. Will be just once you remove that K shell electron, the binding energy that emerges is 69.5. And that's it. In a nutshell, that's all it says. This one gets a little bit more scientific, but yeah, we'll see. I'll take a look at it. That's great questions, John. Anything else? From anyone else? Okay, so we've gone through Brim. Go back and read it. Pretty simple. There's some math applications. Once we get back into Monday, we'll kind of recap again. I'll send you my PowerPoints here in a little bit. And we need to get into tube filtration. Okay? And then we get into the emission spectrum. All right. Any other questions before I head out? No? Okay. Okay. All right. Well, you guys have a good one. Bye. Sorry.